Welcome to the Broth. We're going to be talking about Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 1, Strange New Worlds. And we're just going to dive right into the broth on this one. So, to open out this series, we start off with Commander Una's monologue. She's talking about science fiction and kind of what that means to humanity. I think that's a great way to start the series because science fiction means hope, you know? Science fiction has always meant the dream of something more. And I think that's perfect to start this Strange New World series out with because as they marketed it, it's supposed to be a callback to TOS and the original kind of vibe and feeling of Star Trek. And I just think that's a really awesome opening, just talking about everything that science fiction represents to humanity. And while we're seeing this monologue or hearing this monologue, we are seeing this species come in contact with what looks like a Federation ship. And they seem amazed. They seem awestruck, you know? I mean, do you remember the first time you saw a Federation ship? It's pretty fascinating, you know? And it just from the very beginning, it gets this feeling of excitement, you know? Or at least for me, and I am a longtime Star Trek fan, so I am a little bit biased. I have been waiting for a Star Trek series to kind of jump back into that episodic structure. And just from the beginning of this episode, it felt like that. So, after we see this species kind of awestruck by this planet, or by the ship, we see Pike. Pike is at his home, and he's watching an old school science fiction movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still, which honestly, out of humility, I must admit I haven't watched. But you can tell just from that little clip that they showed you in the beginning of this episode that it's going to relate to the episode later on. And I think that was a good choice. It seemed like they were all referring to the Federation and what the Federation represents. And I think for this, not only this episode, but for what this whole series seems like it's going to be about, I think that was a good start for Pike. And great symbolism. So Pike is sitting at the breakfast table. He was cooking his wife breakfast, or his significant other. I'm not too familiar with the character, forgive me. But he's sitting with her. They're talking about what he's going through, which kind of falls back onto Discovery and everything that happened in season 2 of Discovery and his interaction with the time crystal on Boreth and how that affected his psyche. She's really trying to get at him and understand what's going on with him, and he doesn't budge. He doesn't really tell her exactly what happened to him. You can see that he's still reluctant from it. He's dealing with some things. So after that, we see Pike riding this horse out in the Montana wilderness. A beautiful scene out in the Montana wilderness. And he's riding, and we're hearing this triumphant orchestra, which leads me to one more topic, the score of the episode, which was absolutely fantastic all the way through. We get some callbacks to old Star Trek songs, old Star Trek music in the background while something profound is happening. So I just think that's great. But yeah, this scene has a great score of its own. Really fascinating. And we also see a ship landing, a shuttle, flying down, landing down right by Pike and his horse. You know, his horse kind of goes crazy. Whoa, whoa. He gets a little took back by it. And honestly, Pike kind of has an attitude with an admiral, Mr. Admiral April, who steps out of the shuttlecraft. And he's kind of giving him attitude like he's bothering him on his leave. It's clear to us Pike took leave because he's dealing with something, this thing that happened on Boreth. And just from their little interaction, you can tell that it seems like they've had a past together. They kind of refer that they were possibly, Admiral April was in command of Pike at one time. And I think that's all good stuff. They're talking about Una and how she's kind of brazen and wild, and how that reminded April of how Pike used to be as a commander. So I thought that was good set of way of showing us that they've had a connection and they've had a past. Throughout this scene, you can definitely tell that April is trying to get Pike back onto the bridge of the Enterprise. He can tell that he took this leave because he's going through something, and April doesn't really understand what Pike is going through. He's asking him, he's trying to get him to be vulnerable with him, and Pike isn't really breaking the barrier down. He says that's classified, which is kind of a callback to Discovery and the ending of season 2 where everything's classified. You have Spock who's talking to the board, and they're saying that it can't be spoken of again, which, it's a callback to Discovery. I respected it. But Pike isn't going to be vulnerable with April, and I thought that was interesting because it calls back to that other scene that we just had where he wasn't really vulnerable with his significant other either. So I really enjoyed that, especially because one of the people he trusts is in the next scene. We get Spock, who is with, I believe, T'Pring, who I'm not completely familiar with. I remember watching the TOS episode, but it's very fuzzy now. But I like that she was in this. It's a callback to TOS, and it definitely builds Spock's character to that moment of TOS. And it kind of shows us what he's going to be going through throughout this show, and at least this season. He is prioritizing Starfleet over T'Pring, and she's having some issues with that. And in that very scene, you have Pike calling him to tell him, April is ordering us back on the Enterprise. We got to get back to it. We got to go back out there. So everything's kind of symbolic, and I think that's good writing because you're showing what T'Pring is upset about while also literally showing it. You're showing that Spock is prioritizing Starfleet over his priorities on Vulcan. Well done. So the next scene, you see Pike pulling up on a shuttlecraft to the beautiful Enterprise, which I also think is a callback to the motion picture and that beautiful scene that Lower Decks made fun of. Oh, everyone just in awe of the beautiful ship. Oh my goodness. It's glorious, especially when you got a big movie budget behind it, which I think it's awesome that Lower Decks had that scene where they made fun of it. You can tell that Pike, thinks of Enterprise as home just with the way he's looking at it. And we get him transporting over, where we have Spock to greet him. And oh my, the beautiful girl in all her glory. She's just as beautiful on the inside as she is the out. The old Enterprise, the old faithful, the old lassie, as Scotty would say. I really enjoyed the transporter room. And that being said, I really enjoyed almost every single set of this show and definitely every single set on the Enterprise. So we kind of get a view of that while he's walking with Spock to the bridge. So we get him walking from the transporter pad to the turbo lift, coming up to the bridge. So the viewer gets a good look at the basics of the ship right there in the first viewing of it, which I don't know if many Star Treks have done great. I know Voyager did pretty good in its premiere episode of showing you the layout of the ship all the way through, so the viewer has a good understanding. So while Pike and Spock are walking through the ship, they're having a conversation, just kind of about everything that's going on, about Una. And throughout the conversation, you can almost feel that Pike is kind of grooming him to become a commander, most likely. Which is really fascinating because when we get to the bridge, we get the scene with Lieutenant La'an acting commander. And Pike's kind of taken back. Whoa, taken back. I wasn't ready for a new commander, an acting commander, basically. And I think that's really cool because it makes it feel like this ship has existed. He tells her that, you have big shoes to fill. Well, that makes it feel, just that one tiny line, like there's been history on this ship. There's been things that have been going on. This ship has existed, which I think is a callback also to TOS. And the way TOS felt right from the beginning. We're going out there, sending you out, which I don't think any other Star Trek really had the vibe of. None of those Star Trek pilots really had that vibe of we've been out here. They were all just being commissioned. Captain Sisko was just being commissioned to DS9. Janeway was leaving space dock with Voyager. So I think that's really great that we have a lived-in ship for the first time since TOS. I think that's awesome. So we have La'an, and she's going to be commander, and that kind of leads up to later on for a moment with Spock, where, like I said, it feels like he's being groomed to be commander, but he might not be ready yet, which I think is perfect, and it's awesome, because that's going to be his arc. Probably for this whole show, is leading him up to that commander, the commander's chair, that right-hand man, and I think that's going to be great development. So we have Pike kind of going through the bridge crew. You say what's up to Cadet Uhura. We see Ortega. We're getting familiarized with the crew, and he's about to send them out. But before he sends the crew out, he has a moment of self-doubt, and he's looking at his pad on his captain's chair here, and oh no, he sees himself melting, which represents what happened to him at the there at the end of Discovery, where he saw his future, and just a moment of self-doubt before he's sending the ship out to eventually his fate. He's riding out to his own fate. I consider that very symbolic and very well done. But also, Spock notices this moment of self-doubt, which really shows you insightfulness of Spock and how he can read humans and the way he cares about humans, because it piques the interest in his own humanity. All well done. All of it. So you see Spock kind of concerned about Pike, and then Pike ends up going to his ready room right afterwards, and he's dealing with it. He sees himself. He sees the fate that he may face, that he's going to face in the future, and he's having a rough time. And you can see by the facial expressions from Anson Mount, which really goes out to his acting. He's dealing with it. He's going through it. And then you have Spock come through to have a heart-to-heart with Pike. And you can tell that he really cares about Pike's mental status, and he believes in him as a captain. So they're having a conversation about fate and knowing his own fate and knowing when he's going to die, which is approximately 10 years in the future. And he has some great dialogue where he tells Spock, 10 years, is that long from now? Is it? Is it? All of a sudden, I feel like it is, which was really great because you can see him dealing with it mentally in his mind. You can see him contemplating this. And that is another shout to Anson Mount's acting. Throughout this episode, this scene was the first time that Spock and Pike really had an interaction like that. And it's the first time that Pike really let himself be vulnerable with someone. He was talking to his lady, his significant other, and he was talking to his past captain, who he didn't feel comfortable enough to share what was really going on inside of him and inside of his mind. So that goes to show you the relationship that him and Spock have grown at this point, and that Spock believes in him, and there's a sense of loyalty coming from both sides. And that was well done, because I think we will see that grow. And maybe we'll even see some type of hint of how they got to this point of this chemistry that they share. And I'm interested to see it for sure. So after all this, we eventually get them pulling up to the planet of Kylie 279, where they found this warp signature and the planet that Una is stuck on. So they're trying to figure out exactly where this planet is, first contact-wise. Are they ready for first contact? And immediately it seems like there's no space docks. There's no really sign of advanced starships. And they're trying to figure out what happened to Una. Their ship is empty. They eventually, I believe, get her signature down on the planet. And immediately, Lieutenant La'an is questionable of this situation. She doesn't feel like they're ready for first contact. And she feels like something is going on. And she requests that Captain Pike puts the shields up, which he eventually does. He puts those shields up. But not before Spock questions it. He questions that that's the right choice in a first contact scenario. It's going to look like they may be aggressors if they put their shields up. However, it seems like Captain La'an, being a security officer, was ready for situations that maybe Spock wasn't thinking of. Maybe considering his science position or considering his overall experience this far. Showing us that maybe he's not ready for that commander position yet. And also showing us Lieutenant La'an has a security background. It's double downing on what they've already said. They've given us exposition to tell us that she's security, but now they're showing us, which I think was well done. Because I think it's, again, going to fall back on Spock's whole entire arc of the show. So they end up getting attacked by some plasma torpedoes, which end up being 21st century technology. So they put two and two together that, there's no way they have the technology for warp drive. They must be at least 100 years behind warp drive. So how do they have this and what happened? So they are trying to figure it out. They don't really know. They need to figure out more about the planet and the species, so they realize they need to change their genetic code and go down to the planet to really figure out what's going on. And that's where we have one of my favorite sets of this whole episode, and I think I'm going to love it a lot. Right there next to Voyager here, Sickbay. Whew, man, the Sickbay set looked really pretty. I don't think we got a good look at the whole entire set, but we got a good look at it. And we definitely got a good look into the relationship between the Doctor, M'Benga, and Captain Pike. Seems like they've known each other. They went backpacking through Kenya together. Seems like they've had a past posting together. And it seems like they respect and trust one another. They're all making greetings. Lieutenant La'an meets M'Benga for the first time. And then we also get the introduction to Nurse Chapel, who is, in fact, a geneticist, which makes her perfect for the job, like Pike says. So they're there to get their genetic coding mixed up so they can go down and visit the planet. Good classic Star Trek stuff, good classic sci-fi. We've seen this in other Trek episodes. We've seen this kind of in, even First Contact when they're disguising themselves and to interact with species after World War III. Other humans after World War III. So I think that's kind of cool because that actually relates to the episode later as well. So they're in sick bay, and we actually end up getting some good character stuff from Lieutenant La'an. She wants to feel the pain of the genetic procedure, and it's literally messing with her veins and everything. So before she goes through with it, she has a one-on-one with Pike where, he tells her, I know about your past. I've read your file. And he's telling her, you might not want to go through with this pain. And Lieutenant La'an responds kind of adversely where, Captain, people survive through things. That's where he tells her, well, there's surviving and then there's living. Well, it's your choice. And he doesn't make her go through with the procedure, which I think is the beginning of a great bond between them. And it's great character insight for Pike because he's not willing to make someone do something they're uncomfortable with. And that's great Trek spirit as far as allowing people to decide for themselves. Of course, you try to guide them to what you feel might be good for them. But overall, people will decide for themselves, and you have to allow them that choice because that is the noble thing to do. And Pike is anything. Anything, if all noble, he's noble, above all else. So I thought that was really great for his character and for their relationship going forward. So she ends up going through with the pain where it just seems miserable. And eventually we have them, they end up going down to the planet. You see them transport. You see the transporter chief, perhaps, kind of like Miles O'Brien, who knows? And they go down to the planet, and they see this planet is in a state of civil unrest. There's two factions who are going against one another. You kind of get that vibe right off the bat. It's definitely a good representation of maybe the way Earth has been in the past, maybe the way Earth is right now, but without going too overboard. They end up running into a few what looks like a scientist or a military. They're in garb, and they end up knocking them out like classic Star Trek. Take their uniforms, good old classic stuff. And they end up, by Lieutenant Lawn's request, sending them up. Which is showing us that she does have the ability to kind of make command decisions. Taking a little bit of the load off Pike for every moment of the show. She requests they go up and go up in the sick bay and maybe have their memories wiped. And we have them up there, and they end up getting into a ruckus with Nurse Chapel, who seems like a pretty interesting new character. Like I said, she's a geneticist. She feels kind of goofy, maybe a little flirty, which seems fun. Like they're going to mess with that in the future. But she ends up having to chase one of these down by M'Benga's request because they're running through the halls, and they end up running right into a turbo lift with who? Uhura. And if we know anything about Uhura, she could talk a cat off a fish wagon. She could talk you into absolutely anything. And they kind of have her do that. She already has understanding of the planet. She ends up connecting with this alien and ends up getting to the point where he can be hypo sprayed to calm down. I thought it was a little bit of a crazy, hectic moment, but it was also reminiscent of TOS and the whole campy vibe, goofy vibe of TOS, some of TNG and the other Trek series, but really predominantly the TOS campiness and goofy vibe. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the moment with Uhura. It was a subtle way of giving her character stuff without going too deep into it, without going too far off the plot of the pilot, which again, a pilot is so important because you're introducing characters as much as you are introducing a story of its own. And I think it's hard to balance that in a pilot of any show, let alone a show that's as nuanced and as layered as Star Trek. So they are now trying to find Una on the planet. So as they're on their way to find her, we have Spock and his genetic modification slowly wearing off. We get a cool little melting effect on his ear. So we get this sense of urgency. So they need to find her and hurry up before those modifications wear off. And they end up finding Una, where we end up getting some of the major plots of the episode, some of the major ideas as of why she went down to the planet. We found out that they were able to reverse engineer a warp core or a warp bomb from what they saw from afar in Discovery's battle at the end of season 2 with Control, where it was just a huge, massive battle, and they actually affected this planet through this battle. So we see Spock eventually wear down on his genetic modifications, and they end up having to, have some fisticuff scenes where they're fighting the species, where I was like, wow, they're fighting this alien species. Peace must be kind of out the window. Oh no, this is upsetting, kind of. And then they end up trying to get away. They're about to get away, and Pike tells Una, like, what happened? They were not ready for first contact, where she explains this was from the battle with Control. They were able to reverse engineer a warp core and a warp bomb, and now they're going to destroy their own planet, basically. So, inadvertently, Starfleet had affected this planet. So Pike felt the need to make things right. So he tells everyone to go back to the ship, and he takes Spock with him to confront the species head on. So he really shows how brazen he is. Almost in a Kirk, maybe even a Sisko-esque act of bravery, he confronts them head on with Spock, who is clearly alien, as Spock says. And Pike, he was counting on it. He was counting on that he'd appear alien to this species, which was a great reveal for Pike's character and his faith that the interest in the unknown will prevail the fear of the unknown. So he tells them, the species, to take him to their leader, which they do. He ends up talking to one of the leaders of the factions who's almost hell-bent on destroying the other faction and spilling blood, as she says. And she even goes as far to threaten Pike. But Pike has the bigger stick, and he shows off the Enterprise. And another ballsy move, tells her, hey, said the one with the bigger stick. Well, it looks like that's me. Look at that old girl in all her glory. The beautiful Enterprise. So, seems like they're ready to back down, and they're ready to question their next steps. They're ready to at least talk with this other faction who they haven't spoken with in years. So, while the planet is trying to make peace with itself, Pike kind of takes a step back. We get him on the ship, and we get another good Lieutenant La'an moment, which I think Lieutenant La'an is going to be a huge corner piece of this show because she's probably going to represent a classic Star Trek character, almost in the way that Spock did in TOS, the way that Data did in TNG, Seven of Nine and the Doctor and Voyager, and Phlox and T'Pol in Enterprise. Classic Star Trek characters who are learning more about humanity as they go along. So they talk about everything that happened to her on the Gorn ship and how that relates to Pike and the issues that he's going through with survival, with his life. You know, when facing death, you have to deal with your own fear. And I think that's kind of what they were talking about. And it was very fascinating how they connected their two arcs in that one simple scene of dialogue. And I'm excited to see where they're going to take her character in the future because, like I said, it seems like they're doing some classic Star Trek things with that character. There's a lot of themes within her character that I think are going to be prevalent throughout the whole show. And, again, be prevalent for also Pike's journey as it was in this episode. So they end up having that conversation, and while that's going on, it seems like the two factions aren't getting along, so Pike is going to go back down to the planet to see if he cannot reason with them or not. So he goes down to the planet, and they're going at it, you know, and that's where he shows them a little bit of Earth's history, you know, the Eugenics War, and eventually World War III, which in Star Trek lore was really only referenced from my memory in First Contact, which we talked about earlier. And I think it's cool because they actually depict World War III and the damage that it did, which is really prevalent right now where we are in history. And the airing of Strange New Worlds almost mirrors the airing of TOS and what we're dealing with as far as a global crisis and how our future is kind of in a state of, who knows, you know? And Pike gives a speech about World War III and the way it affected humanity and how this species on Kylie 279 can choose to do better. They can choose to be better than the way we are. And there's so much hope in possibilities. And just imagine the possibilities. So Pike ends up getting through to this species because they see themselves in humanity, and they also see the hope of how far humanity has come, which I think is going to be a theme of this whole entire show, that what humanity is capable of when we work together as a team and what's possible when we work together. That Pike scene was really meaningful. I liked how it connected to what he's dealing with and his future. There was a little bit of exposition there of, oh, I'm dealing with my future and what might happen, you know, and this is why I'm here to help you. But I think it was natural exposition and it was well done in the vibe and feeling of this episode. So we get that kind of happy ending there where we see how Enterprise actually affects the culture of this species. You know, we see how it affects school. We see how it affects their daily life. And we see how it affects faith and religion. Which, right, if we made first contact with a species, that would probably make you question the way you view the whole universe. And maybe the intergalactic connection. So that was well done for that storyline. The first contact concept is huge in Star Trek, and it relates to that first opening scene with Una giving the monologue. And I'm excited to see more, because that was great. So we end up ending the episode with Lieutenant La'an and Pike, where really this whole episode was leading her to being a commissioned officer on the Enterprise, which was really a big potential for her. She'll be able to learn more and grow more, and maybe it'll prep her to actually be a commander in the same way that that Spock is being prepped to be a commander. So they have some good dialogue there where Pike tells her remarkable growth is possible. And they have a good little connection to World War III and why they put what is basically a forest out in space. So it was really hopeful, and it was done in good taste. And it felt like we are back to this episodic Star Trek. But we're doing it in a different time where we're capable of a lot more. We are capable of making sets and making scenes that are more believable and a little bit more awe-inspiring. And I think that's going to resonate with a lot of viewers as it resonated with me. And maybe you disagree. Maybe you didn't like the episode. And I would like to start engaging in a conversation as of maybe why you didn't like the episode. Maybe you felt like it was disrespectful to past Trek and lore and canon. And I would really like to talk to you guys about that as well. So I'm going to be reviewing this next episode here in the next few days. Episode 2 of the first season of Strange New Worlds. And I hope you guys tap in with me because it's been a blast. Comment and let's share some ideas together. You guys have a good one.